And so you can see that his sort of brilliant defense of the Dardanelles is sort of what made him this popular man. He definitely got the better of Churchill's thinking. So, what happened to Churchill? Churchill was a man defeated. This absolutely broke him. Blount records in his diaries that Churchill became very depressed, and he would, one of the times when he was painting, we all know that Churchill was a painter, he said that there was paint on his hands and he felt like it was more like blood on his hands. So to sort of square this with himself, Churchill actually volunteers to go to the Western Front, goes out and joins the Royal Scot Fusiliers, the 6th Battalion of the Royal Scot Fusiliers, and actually fights in trench warfare before coming home sort of 6 months later after seeing a considerable bit of action. And is basically invited by his old buddy Lloyd George to join the War Cabinet as a Minister of Munitions. Now, this is a particularly interesting coalition. Now, remember that Churchill's a Tory. He switches in 1904 to become a Liberal to join Lloyd George. Lloyd George, however, is a Gladstonian Liberal. I mean, in the most hardcore tradition you can think of. He hates the Turks. He hates them. He can't stand them. He wants them out of Europe and spends a great deal of time and energy after the war trying to crush Turkey. And this leads to huge infighting between Churchill and Lloyd George. So once Churchill joins the cabinet, he constantly sends letter after letter after letter to Lloyd George begging him to change his Turkish policy because it's only going to ruin things in the Middle East. And in fact, he records in his history of the First World War that Lloyd George's policies were so out of whack that the whole attitude of the peace conference towards Turkey was so harsh that that which was right and good had now changed sides. So you can see here again, Churchill feels quite sympathetic towards what was formerly the Ottoman Empire. After the surrender of the Turkish forces, this again continually happens. There's a remarkable bit, I won't get into the Chenak crisis and maybe in questions, but because Churchill does another amazing about face as it relates to Turkey. But up until that point, he had always been sort of pro-Turk. And it's amazing to me that in May 1919, Churchill receives a letter from Enver Pasha. This is one of those amazing things, and I have it here. This is what I call an example of Ottoman French. It's very difficult to read because it's not really French. It's not really anything. It took me a very long time to decipher this. This is just some excerpts from it. You can see Enver's signature over there. And in this letter, Enver writes to him to say, now that we the Turks are beaten and at the mercy of our enemy England, I know all too well, which I know all too well is powerful and generous. Ebner even urged Churchill to appeal directly to Lloyd George on behalf of the Turks, saying, knowing your personal generosity and your chivalrous influence on your colleagues, especially Mr. Lloyd George, I pray you intervene. I have never forgotten the benefits made to this country when you have intervened in our favor. And what's really remarkable is that Churchill actually did this. Churchill continually intervened on behalf of the Turks up until the Chenak crisis in 1522. Enver then sort of ends his letter, and this is remarkable. Enver explained that now that the Ottoman Empire had been swept away by the House of Islam, the Darul Islam, now that the Ottoman Empire had always kept the House of Islam in check, and after its dissolution, that means that this would now fall to the West. And the very last bit of the letter, he warns Churchill of the dangers of the deep fire of Islam. Now, what I think Enver is saying here is that the Ottoman Empire was a political institution that unified, to some degree, the religion of Islam for its own ends, and that for 400 years, give or take, the Caliphate, Constantinople, Istanbul, whatever you want to call it, had been the heart of the House of Islam. And that the Ottoman Empire, I think, sort of served as its barriers. And sure, there were Muslims outside of the Ottoman Empire, but for Enver Pasha, the Ottoman Empire was the House of Islam. There's an Islamic phrase, Darul Islam, which literally translates to House of Islam. But now that that had gone, it would be the West's responsibility to deal with the various forms of sectarian fighting. All the nationalist movements which had plagued the Ottoman Empire in the latter half of the 19th century, all of those movements which have been coalescing around and using Islam for their own political purposes, the dervishes, the Wahhabists, the different sects, the Shia. And so I think this brings us back again to the beginning, to the first quote. If you think about Islam as the sting of the wasp, or the horn of the rhinoceros, or the way of Islam. So, in conclusion, in the latter half of the 19th century, the British Empire feared a pan-Islamic movement. And in the early 20th century, there missed opportunities, poor diplomacy, and ultimately war. The British Empire unknowingly unleashed forces which set the stage for our defining struggle in our own time in the 21st century. A clash of civilizations, to borrow from Huntington. For this reason, the importance of the First World War cannot be emphasized enough. And for this reason, Churchill's lesson on the weight of Islam is more important than ever. Thank you very much.
Our speaker has agreed to take questions from the audience.